system.
Yes.
It's just the same system, different name on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why I refuse to let go of the word technocracy. We must call it, this is nothing new. This is not new. This is old wine.
Yes. Yeah.
And
that's right.
People need to know that. So that's why I continue to use it. In any case, the United Nations came up with this whole social justice stuff to redistribute wealth in the world. And people look at the UN and say, that's a communist organization. They're always wanting to redistribute wealth and stuff between rich countries and poor countries and, the North and the South and whatever. They're constantly making trouble. I just want to make a distinction here, I think. When Brzezinski wrote his book, Between Two Ages, he wrote about Marxism quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But he basically concluded that Marxism was only a stepping stone to the final era, which he called the technocratic era.
Yes.
That would be technocracy.
Yes. That
would be a resource-based economic system, like where we're headed today.
Yes.
But he said that Marxism was a necessary stepping stone to get there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the end of it. It wasn't the purpose of Marxism, in his mind, to just become a Marxist, whatever, communism or global socialist state or whatever. That was never the intention.
Mm-hmm.
The intention was to use Marxism as that necessary stepping stone to deconstruct society.
Yes.
So that technocracy would be like the phoenix that rises up out of the ashes, if I'm making a good word picture here.
Oh, absolutely. I believe you are, Pat. And what you're describing reminds me of the Hegelian dialectic using the technocrats are using social justice just to move the marker. The social justice is not the ends. It's just a stepping stone to where they want to get. That's what you're saying, right?
That's right. It's getting them to their end. Their end is a resource-based economic system where they control all the resources.
Yes.
Now, this has never been done in history before. This is a global plan. This is not a regional plan.
Right.
This is global. And everywhere you look in the world today, resources are being gobbled up at alarming rates.
Oh, yes.
And, oh, my gosh, I mean, look what's happening in America in the West here, like the Bureau of Land Management, gobbling up land like there's no tomorrow. You've got the United Nations, or not the UN. The UN's going with them, but you have the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund going around to countries now that were put hopelessly in debt by the same people.
That's right. Yeah.
These are the smaller countries in South America and Europe, or Africa, where there's untold resources, wealth and resources and stuff. They're going to these countries, and they're saying, "Look, we're sorry that you're over your head in debt. You'll never get out of debt. We know that. You're probably going to suffer societal meltdown if you don't do anything about it. But we have a deal for you." Well,
should scare them to death.
We have a new program called Land for Debt Swaps.
Yeah.
And we'd like to swap your debt. In other words, we'll forgive your debt if you give us your resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What a deal.
And we'll just take that 100 square mile strip over there and that 500 square mile strip over there, and you're not using it anyway. So you won't miss it, but this is a way for you to get out of debt. Countries are falling for this because they know if they don't get rid of the debt, they will be repossessed altogether. And their countries literally will melt down and break down. They'll have no food. All the politicians will be thrown out of the office or thrown out of windows.
Yeah.
And, which has happened before, and I think they know that in South America.
Yep. Yep.
You really tick the people off enough, you're gonna take a one-way trip to the basement.
Yes.
So this is going on all over the planet right now, and through the auspices of the United Nations and many NGOs, non-governmental organizations that are working with the United Nations, countries are being twisted out of their resources, and it's getting locked up in what conceptually is the global common trust. for resources.
Yeah.
And their idea is to put everything they can offline to humans, normal humans, and put it in the global trust that will be managed by global trustees. They never say who that's going to be, but I've got news. I know who it is. I've got a pretty good idea who those trustees are going to be.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're one of them.
Yeah, pretty sure I'm not, Pat.
No, I'm not one of them either.
That's right.
But what that means for us is, let's say you're a businessman, just a run-of-the-mill business guy, and you had a couple, $3 million in cash, looking for something to do. And I don't know, let's say you drill oil wells, for instance, and you think, I'm pretty good at this stuff. I know where there is some oil. And so you go to the Global Trust and you say, that little strip of ocean right off of Florida, whatever, I'm really sure I'd like to risk some money. My own money, of course, I'd like to go out and drill a couple of wells out there, and I think I'll hit pay dirt, and I'll make a lot of money. And, you're hoping that they would lease you that tract of ocean for whatever, a few $100,000. And they would see you coming, and they would bolt the door. Basically, you'd never get in. If you even could ask the question, we'd say, look, we don't know who you are. You're just a little pipsqueak. And, we don't know. We don't have anything for you. Get lost. And you'd come home and say, well, so much for that venture. You just would not break into that global trust of resources. You'd never see it. You'd never touch it. If you tried to get in illegally to do something, they would probably come after you with tanks, guns, ships, and whatever's necessary to protect it. But if you were one of the global chosen few, like, say, BP,
yes,
or Exxon, or whoever, and you wanted to drill some wells, why, here's where you send your money, Mr. President, whatever. They said, yeah, we'd love to work with you. You're right up, right on here. They'll see the resources, but you won't.
That's right. Yeah.
And that means that we're developing a two-class global society of the haves and the have-nots. There will be those business people who have exclusive access to those resources. Everybody else will be locked out, excluded completely from economic benefit.
Yes.
From those resources. And people say, well, that's preposterous. Let me tell you, there's a 25,000 square mile wilderness area in Idaho called the Frank Church Wilderness Area. It was just a boon for hikers and hunters and, people that just like to go out and do stuff out in the wild. Well, they've introduced wolves and bears and other things and outlawed guns and stuff. At the same time, it's not too friendly a place that you want to go.
No.
Maybe you could take your bow and arrow like the Indians used to do. But just, a few years ago, they went and closed off all the roads. They locked the gates. They put gates across the roads. They locked them, put no trespassing sign, no ATVs allowed. And you will be prosecuted if we catch you on this property anymore. It was locked up, literally locked up. You can't even go out there and take a pine cone out of that area.
Well,
not legally.
I'm wondering, Patrick, what they're up to.
Well, this is the resource grab.
Yeah.
Right? This is it.
Yeah.
They're grabbing the resources, taking it away from you and I, and putting it into a global common trust that will be accessed by the global elite who want it when they want it.
Yes.
All the rest of us will be excluded from it.
Yes.
And this is why Agenda 21, by the way, had a clause in it that you can buy that book on Amazon, by the way. If people are wondering, is that a myth? I heard that was a myth. No, go to Amazon, look it up. Agenda 21, buy it. It's about $40. You get your own copy.
Yep.
But there's a clause in the Agenda 21 book that says private property is going to be done away with altogether. that the selfish men, the citizens, don't have any need for private property.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can keep the clothes you have. You can keep your watch and your jewelry and, personal belongings. But property outside of that, like, you mean larger assets like land and a business and stuff like that? That's right. Private property is on the chopping block altogether. It has been since 1992.
Yeah.
And this is the agenda that the United Nations is pushing. Common people like you and me are being stripped of our property rights, slowly but surely.
Yeah.
People out west here that have had, like ranchers, that have had access to public land that they paid leases on for 100 years, not, going back more than 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
This was their property. They owned this property. They're being kicked off by the Bureau of Land Management and other federal agencies, run off the land.
Yeah.
They're just run out of business. They can't survive without that land.
Yeah.
Private property is being stripped away all over our nation and all over other nations around the world as well. And so you say, well, what happens to the private property? Okay, if your private property is taken away, say you have a 100-acre farm, and the government somehow, or maybe it's the Nature Conservancy, whatever, comes out and grabs your property, and all of a sudden it's not yours anymore, it's theirs. Once you lose it, no human will ever, nobody like you will ever get that property back.
Right.
You lose it, you lose it for good.
Yeah.
And that property will be held up and for access to it will only be granted to those elites who say they want to have access to it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
But you'll never see it again.
Yeah.
This is happening all over America.
You mentioned, Patrick, that the UN is, of course, leading the charge globally in this. They are at the center. In fact, they could be seen more or less as the hub for this kind of activity. And you've got a statement in the article that I referenced earlier, The Pseudo-Ethics of Social Justice, right from the UN's own website. It says this, and I'd like to read that, and then I have a question. From the UN's own website says this, quote, "For the United Nations, the pursuit of social justice for all is at the core of our global mission to promote development and human dignity." Now, I've got a lot of issues with that statement in itself, but I'm going to continue reading it so we can hear from you. Just the things that are implied there are outrageous. But anyway, continue the quote. "The adoption by the International Labor Organization of the Declaration on Social Justice for a Fair Globalization is just one recent example of the UN system's commitment to social justice." Now, what in the world is the United Nations involving itself in the promotion of development and human dignity on a global scale? Isn't this just a cover for everything you've been talking about?
It is.
Yeah.
Every socialist, communist dictator in history has used the same kind of bait and switch. They say that social justice is good for society. Even if it's not good for you individually, it's good for society.
Yes. The so-called common
good.
good.
That's right. And they'll use terms like human dignity. Well, you're not against human dignity, are you? How could you answer that,
Right.
Well, yeah, I'm not for it. Well, you must be for social justice then, too. No, I'm not.
Right.
Round and round you go. But this is the same thing. Adolf Hitler could have said something almost very similar. He could have said something like this. He could have said, for the German state, the pursuit of social justice for all is at the core of its global mission to promote development and human dignity for all German citizens. He could have said that. He probably did, for all I know. I could just hear it coming out of his mouth.
Something very similar.
The same thing.
Sure.
I could hear the same thing coming out